Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi. When is this vacation going to end?
Good morning, Dr. Rubin.
Looks like a long one.
Yes, we're enjoying ourselves here. Wish you guys could join us here also.
Well.
Good morning, Vinvai. Good morning, Rufai. I'll be seeing you soon in Nigeria, though. Time is almost over for the holiday. But first, let me tell you, what is happening around the world. Now, it seems as though the tide continues turning, especially when we're looking at the Western world. That's as Canada has joined the likes of the United Kingdom and France to officially plan to recognize Palestinian statehood in September. Now, this time, we've seen an announcement from the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, and he has made this announcement saying that it's going to recognize Palestine, but that's if Palestine commit to a few reforms centered on democracy. Firstly, what he wants is Palestine to agree to elections to be held in 2026, and also those elections have to exclude Hamas. Let's take a listen to what Mark Carney had to say.
This intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much-needed reforms, including commitments by the Palestinian Authority's President Abbas to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold general elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarize the Palestinian state.
Well, just for the sake of clarity, it is important to note that when we're looking at Palestine and the Palestinian Authority, of which Mahmoud Abbas is the president of, the Palestinian Authority controls most of the West Bank, whereas Hamas, the armed group, which many Western powers refer to as a terrorist organization, Hamas in control of Gaza. And neither region, neither the West Bank nor Gaza, has had an election since 2006. That is why Canada specifically is focusing on the Palestinian Authority, making sure that they have elections in 2026 and making sure that they commit to democratic reforms and exclude Hamas from them. Carney did speak to the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas on Wednesday, and as we said, it's looking as though more countries on the UN Security Council, more Western powers are looking at the situation in terms of resolving the crisis in the Middle East by recognizing statehood in Palestine. Let's move on to the African continent now, where we're looking at relations between South Sudan and Uganda. Now, both countries have long actually enjoyed a positive relationship. However, recently we have been seeing smaller scale skirmishes because of the border between South Sudan and Uganda. In some areas of the border, it is quite poorly defined, and that has resulted in fighting between troops from both countries, which has resulted in at least 6 people killed. Now, as it stands, there's no real consensus on the cause of this latest bout of fighting. If you speak to the South Sudanese troops, they say that they were on their own land in the Kajo-Keji County of South Sudan when 5 of their soldiers were killed by Ugandan fire. However, if you speak to the Ugandan troops, they say it was quite the opposite. They say South Sudanese troops were on their land in the West Nile region, which is Ugandan land. And they say that those troops refused to leave. It was that refusal that triggered the gunfire, which also resulted in 1 Ugandan soldier being killed. As I said, both of these countries do enjoy positive relations with each other. And it was, in fact, Ugandan forces that backed forces loyal to South Sudanese President Salva Kiir during the country's fight for independence, which was actually won in 2011, and through the bouts of civil fighting that we've seen in South Sudan since then. It has been Ugandan troops supporting the presidency and the troops loyal to Salva Kiir. So it is quite interesting to see that this level of fighting has been taking place. That being said, a joint border committee, it has been announced, will work at finding a peaceful resolution between both of these countries. And then finally, still staying within the East African region of Africa, we're seeing that Tanzania has now banned the involvement of foreign companies in small scale and informal industries in the country. Now, this is a move which threatens essentially to become a non-tariff type of barrier of free trade within the East African community. The East African community is obviously an example of what we have in West Africa, such as ECOWAS. So essentially what we're seeing here is this ban coming from Tanzania covering 15 informal and small-scale sectors. Those include mobile money transfers, tour guiding, small-scale mining, beauty salons, on-farm crop buying, and the establishment of radio and television operations. They say that those areas should and will only now be held by people from Tanzania itself and no foreigners. Now, they're saying that these sectors are better suited to Tanzanians in the country. And the trades minister says that he's hoping that this decision will actually force foreign businesses to focus on larger scale operations and leave the informal businesses to the local community there. It has been quite a controversial decision there, especially since Tanzania is taking quite a hard line. Anyone caught violating these guidelines, these agreements, are now going to be subject to penalties, a lot of visas, but also 6 months in jail. So Tanzania are taking this quite seriously. So too are countries within the East African community. Kenya has come out and decried this move. It's not very happy about it and says that essentially, though the move has been welcomed by Tanzanians, Kenyans and other East African countries believe that this change violates the East African community's agreements, which guarantee the free movement of people and trade. Those are your stories. I'd love to hear your thoughts before we move on to papers.
So part of the hypocrisy of the West is these conditions at which they're going to recognize a two-state solution in a Palestinian state. I think it should be without preconditions. Can I use the word just recognize the thing? But you know the French I was putting before the thing. The truth is, it is mass hypocrisy of Canada to say that, oh, there has to be conditions, and the conditions, elections have to happen. Obviously, Canada knows the context. We know how the 2006 elections went south between Hamas and Fatah. And Hamas dominating majority of the Gaza region, pushing Fatah out, the fight and the assassinations that went on. And now Fatah had to be conditioned to the West Bank. If you put that conditionality of elections, it's not going to happen anytime soon. Because at first, Gaza is already decimated. Are you going to have elections in a place where they're just even trying to get humanitarian aid in and people are dying? Is it the already forsaken or hurt people or brutalized people of Gaza that will come out to vote in those elections? It's not going to be hard and fast. And Hamas, with its own intentions, will not fix things with Fatah overnight. But at least the recognition is the first step in all of this process. Then the talks will continue. Hamas and Fatah have been having talks even up till 2017, 2018, thereabouts. Nothing came out of those talks. Probably there could be a better position now. So Canada putting preconditions just like the UK, I don't think is the best way to go. We need countries to recognize the need for a two-state solution. Then conversations can begin. That recognition alone is going to jolt Israel. Also, when you look at it on ground in Israel, there are forces, human rights forces already speaking against the Netanyahu government. For me, honestly, I think that's the way to go. As regards Sudan, thereabout, and the fight with Uganda, the truth has to be told. It's so easy for them to align, the Ugandans to align with Salva Kiir when they are doing the destructive job in Juba. But they forget that they also have ancillary border issues. And that was what happened only recently. And there's a lot of ethnic dimension into it, and there are also various sides to it.
Yes.
But for me, the sad part is, why does Africa always rigmarole through one point? It's so easy to do these things. Yoweri Museveni, a dictator, can easily partner with Salva Kiir when it suits him and cause destruction against the Riek Machar faction. But they also have attendant border issues based on ethnicity. And when it's time, they go at loggerheads. But that doesn't stop them from collectively killing others. And when you even look at the South Sudan itself, you're like, why is Africa this way? The same South Sudan John Garang fought for, you now see two people that they're only fighting for their own selfish interests, and they bring in an ethnic dimension into it. I keep saying on this show that if you close your eyes and think of an African story, it rings through every part of the continent.
Right. I'll focus on Tanzania because that announcement by the administration of President Salihu Hassan has caused ripple effects across Africa, I believe. Let's begin with the East African region, specifically with Kenya, where Kenyans are feeling that this is a personal attack on them. Now, many people joke and say Kenyans are the Nigerians of East Africa because they're very resourceful people, enterprising people. You find them in every corner. They always find a business to do wherever they arrive. And so is the case that you find in Tanzania. Another country that feels targeted is Somalia, because you also find Somalis, especially when the business involves trade. Somalis are particularly well known for that. So that's on that level where the regional brothers, if I may call them that, are feeling like this is a personal attack. On a higher level, one also has to admit the fact that Tanzania, which has a big part of their revenue driven by tourism, that tourism sector is now dominated by Europeans largely. So some of the industries that have been banned are tour guiding services. I mean, if you go to Tanzania and you go to some areas, you'll find that your tour guide is actually led by a European. There's no good reason why this can't be done by a Tanzanian. There's also real estate. There's a number of them that I think there's a good rationale to say that these are industries that should be protected for locals. However, the major question here is it's not enough to just ban. What else are you doing? Are you going to invest in these industries? Are you going to empower people? Because the reason why a European can come from wherever they came from and be able to run and operate a safari touring business, for example, is because they probably have the capital that they've injected into that business. So there's that aspect to it. Now, on the South African response to it, South Africans are saying, but why are we the ones who are always accused of being xenophobic? Because when South Africans lobbied their government to say that, oh, you know what, there are too many African foreign nationals who are taking all of the lower level jobs. They are traders, they're running all the small shops and so forth, and these industries should be reserved for South Africans. The whole of Africa was up at arms and said, well, this is xenophobic. So South Africans are saying that, why is it that we're saying this is a progressive development for Tanzania, but when we advocated for it domestically, we're accused of being xenophobic. But I think to summarize it all, it's just a reflection of the shift that we are seeing in all countries towards protectionism. How can countries protect their citizens and ensure that their citizens benefit from the economic empowerment? But I think for me, the major takeaway is the fact that you can ban everything under the sun. But if you're not stepping in and creating mechanisms, access to credit, access to investment, the right regulations and so forth, it's just going to be a ban and people will look for ways, loopholes around it, and there won't be any development or economic empowerment on the ground.
Okay, it seems to me that the situation, the story you just reported between Tanzania and Kenya, raises questions about the spread of xenophobia and protectionism, not just between Tanzania and Kenya, but also between South Africa and Nigeria, as you have seen, and in West Africa between Nigeria and Ghana, with Ghana being on the offensive. Now, this raises further questions about the value of these regional, economic blocks that are supposed to ensure integration. Between Tanzania and Kenya, it is East African Community. In West Africa, it is ECOWAS. But on a larger scale, where do we have the African Free Continental Trade Agreement, the objective of which is also to ensure free movement of goods and services, the major challenge in Africa being integration. Now, while the political leaders talk about these principles of integration, free relations and all that, it seems that there's a disconnect between Africans and their leaders. That's the first point. The second point has to do with the fact that there's tension between Tanzania and Kenya. You recall that in May, when Tundu Lissu, the major opposition leader in Tanzania, was charged to court, Martha Karua, former Justice Minister of Kenya, and a lawyer, human rights activist, had led a group of human rights activists to go and observe the trial. Now they were expelled by President Samia Hassan. And we had complained at that time that this was a president that everybody thought would be different from everyone else. Now Tanzania is going to elections in October, and the ruling CPM wants to win. So this may well be a populist move, by the Tanzanian authorities. The fourth point has to do with the fact that Kenya is saying that there could be reciprocal restrictions on the Kenya side. But the big issue is about the crisis in Africa. As for South Sudan and Uganda, now I was in South Sudan, July 9, 2011. That was the day of independence of South Sudan. And President Yoweri Museveni played a very important role on that occasion. In fact, you would think he was the one that won the independence. So he has good relations with Salva Kiir. As recently as March, Ugandan soldiers helped to defend Juba against the forces of the first vice president, who is a rival of Salva Kiir. Now, we now hear that there is a border clash in a place called Kujakuju, something like that. The shared border between Uganda and Tanzania. But these are two friendly countries, and I assume that they will be able to resolve it. It's not of the same scale as the conflict between India and Pakistan over border issues, or between Thailand and Cambodia over border issues, two issues that we have looked at recently. Finally, on Canada. Well, we now have Canada, we have Spain, we have Ireland, we have Norway, we have the UK saying they will recognize the Palestinian state for whatever value it has. It's a symbolic gesture, it seems to me, showing that there is a growing international discontent with the abuses of international law on the part of Israel. Now, 147 countries out of the 193 members of the United Nations General Assembly already recognize the statehood of Palestine. But the US is one exercising veto. And that's why Palestine has been having an observer status in the UN General Assembly since November 2012. Maybe, if there is continued pressure on Israel and the United States, which says these countries recognizing Palestine are trying to reward Hamas, maybe progress will be made. But Israel should not be allowed to get away with its atrocities.
Right. Well, thank you all for your wonderful submissions on the World Brief as always. Let's take a look at the front pages of our papers. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. And This Day, this morning, does lead with Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Atiku Bagudu, saying that the fiscal position of northern states has actually significantly improved under the presidency of Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And that's following sweeping economic reforms that have reduced the region's domestic debt by more than 42%. The New Telegraph this morning leads with anxiety gripping parents and guardians over the increase in school fees across Nigeria. Now, some private institutions have hiked their tuition fees by 50 to 100%. That's as hardship rises, and teachers too are calling for pay rises also. Now, staying on the theme of schooling and hardship, The Guardian says that the suspended school feeding initiative, which was scrapped essentially back in January 2024, it's affected 9 million students and also 250,000 jobs. Just a very interesting graphic on their front page and write up about it there. Now, the hardship does continue with the Daily Sun, reporting on the effects of this nationwide nurses' strike in Nigeria. Now, hospitals nationwide are disrupted, patients have been denied access, and if we're looking at a specific hospital, let's look at Kano. Now, the National Orthopedic Hospital in Kano has had to turn away patients and also discharge patients prematurely because of the lack of staffing on the ground. The nurses are calling for more pay and for better working conditions. To the leadership this morning, its picture headline shows the effects of the flooding in Borno State. 8 buildings have collapsed and a graveyard was completely submerged by the waters. And just finally, we have a trio of newspapers, the Daily Independent, the Daily Times, and the Vanguard, all of them reporting on the NNPC, saying that it's not selling the Port Harcourt refinery, says it spent too much money on its turnaround, and still thinks that there's money to be made from them, to the objection of many people who would disagree with them. Those are your papers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Adefemi Akinsanya, live from Crete in Greece. Happy vacation.